When we came home this past Saturday night, we greeted with the news of this horrific massacre which had taken place in Pittsburgh. Things like this are not supposed to happen. We're not supposed to live in a world which has hatred, blind hatred which is connected to religion, and particularly for Jews who, for so often through history, have been victims. It's something which hurts. And it could well be that the Jews who live in America and other Western countries believe that such events are part of the past. There are times throughout history where Jews have been killed in a synagogue. When I was growing up, I was actually told that my great-grandparents, during the Holocaust, were rounded up in their town and they were all killed in the synagogue. The truth is, there's so little records. When I went back to try to search what happened, it was hard to tell how many were killed in the synagogue and how many instead were taken to Auschwitz. But the image of Jews being rounded up, being killed in various ways in synagogues and Sidurim and the Torah and so on, being full of blood, is something which is an echo from the past, and it's something which is quite painful, and it's something which people just don't believe should happen in America. Although I'll say something which some people may get upset with me, that when such things happen in Israel, and they have, there was the murders of people in Har Nof, and I personally knew 3 of them. There was the kids who were killed in the Merkaz Harav high school. And both of those events were similar types of scenes. And it could be that when it happens in Israel, people make an allowance as if to say we understand, because it could be that maybe the Jews are not really supposed to be there. And I'm not going to go any further along those lines, but we have to just think about that for a second. Because Jews should be protected all over the world. People should be protected. People shouldn't solve problems based upon murder. But especially America, which is a place which for so long has been a safe haven for Jews. Although I will mention that my grandfather, who lost his parents, his parents decided to send him away. Actually, his father got on a boat with him and brought him to America in order to avoid a draft in Europe. And when they got to the shores of the United States, they were not let in. The boat was turned around and they were sent back to Europe, where they both would have ended up being killed. But the boat stopped in Cuba. And my grandfather was encouraged by his father to get off the boat. He was 15, 16 years old, and he spent the next 3 years in Cuba before a relative was able to bring him in to the United States, and he came to New York, where he met my grandmother. But the Jews escaping, the Jews getting away, and immigrants and wandering from place to place, this has been part of our history. And we did think and we did believe that America would be different, and America should be different. America is a wonderful country which is based upon all types of liberties. But it's also become a country where the level of discourse which is taking place, and not even the violence itself, the violence is certainly outside of the pale, but the level of discourse is one that should not exist. A number of years ago, I happened to spend some time with a fellow who at the time was a minister in the Israeli government. And I told him that the way that Israelis speak to one another, and I'm not talking about the Israelis on the street, I'm not talking about the cab driver yelling at the bus driver, I'm talking about members of the parliament, members of the Knesset, members of the government, members of the opposition. I said the levels of discourse which take place is something which is at times horrific, and I said I have a very simple suggestion. Why don't we create a government agency, or a non-government agency, which monitors speech? That whenever somebody misuses speech, and I'm not talking about lashon hara gossip, no, when somebody misuses speech, uses verbal violence, they should be censured. So hearing my accent and my Hebrew with my American accent, he said, well, you're a little naive. This isn't America. You're a little naive, and this is the way that we are. But it's not the way that we're supposed to be. We really should be careful, because verbal violence ends up becoming other types of violence. When we don't speak properly about one another, we end up finding other types of violence. We need to become a civilization, a society, which is more civil. There are deep differences. There's a divide, in not just America, in various countries. There's a divide between what would be called East and West, right and left, and all kinds of other divisions, conservative and liberal. And there are all kinds of differences. Sometimes it's possible that differences are able to create something new which emerges from the arguments. I mean, arguments themselves could be holy. But that's only if you listen, and only if you speak properly. That sometimes differences of opinion can create something which is not on either side. It doesn't have to be 50% in the middle, but sometimes the thesis and the antithesis does create some type of a synthesis which didn't exist before. We need to create something new. We need to create a world where violence is not tolerated. We need to create a world where we learn how to speak to one another, and maybe more important than anything else, we need to create a society that we listen to one another.